Hi, I'm Everett. Welcome back to the shop. This time we have a project that isn't really machining, it's again more automotive work. That's what I am by trade. At first we thought it was a 2008 with a 1.8 liter engine, but it turns out it was a 2009 with a 2.4 liter engine in it, which isn't really a big deal, just needed to get the right parts. So what I'm going to do is we're going to step through the basic procedures of it. I'm not going to go into super crazy detail of everything, just the highlights, a couple specs here and there. But just in case you want to do one on your own, this 2.4 liter engine was used in the Pontiac Vibes, the Toyota Corollas, some of the other ones like with the 4 cylinders. When I was working for GM many moons ago is when the Pontiac Vibes first became part of the product line, and I even went to the product training for it. But again, that was 15 years ago, something around that neighborhood, 14, 15 years ago. So it's not like I've worked on one in recent years. So anyway, I hope you find it amusing. This thing here has a seriously nasty sounding water pump in it. I don't know if you can hear that there. I'm just bringing the microphone down nice and close. Yeah, that water pump has had it. So that's our task today, is get this water pump changed. What I need to do first is jack up the front end, start draining the coolant, and we'll pull the right front tire off just to give us a little bit more clearance to get in there. So we have the coolant draining now. The little radiator drain valve is on the driver's side toward the rear of the vehicle on the radiator tank. Here's a picture of it. And from where it looks like the drain is pointing, if you put a short piece of hose on like this, it will help minimize the messes in a big way. So the next thing you need to do once this is drained is we'll pull the serpentine belt off. So you can't really see the hex that you have to put the socket on to release the tension on the belt. So what I've done is I've put the socket on that little hex in behind them where the belt's, once the belt's off you'll be able to see it. The thing is, these have a hydraulically tensioned belt tensioner. In order to release the tension you have to get your wrench on that, pull back gently and gently and slowly until it releases the tension on the belt, then you can slide the belt off. You'll see a little easier once I have the belt off of the unit. My apologies for the bad lighting. It's just kind of hard to get light in here with the, with the camera and such. I have the socket still on that hex on the bracket that we'll see after, and I have the serpentine belt wrench on it. Let's bring this back. Take the tension off. Flip the belt off. Let go of the tensioner, and we can remove the belt. All right, now to remove the alternator, not only do we have the bolt up top and another one down below, we've also got all the wiring and then a couple brackets. Now this bracket here can actually stay with the alternator, but we have to pull the little wiring harness clip off of it first. There we are. So that one's out. Just has 2 little tabs. It has 2 little tabs on either side of the connector there. Next step, take the easy one. Take that little bolt out. That's off. There we are. Push down on that little tab there. It lifts up on the catch. And then try not to break this guy. Just a little screwdriver. Just twist on the side shield a little bit. That brings up the cover. So that cover goes over top of our high current output lead for the alternator. Just use a gentle amount of impact on the 1/4 inch impact, and alright, so that's off. One last connector to undo here. That gives us lots of slack. Now we can undo the 2 bolts. So here we have the upper bolt and the lower bolt. 14 mil head, 12 mil head. Now this alternator should, might need a little bit of, yeah, there we go. Needs a little bit of persuasion and wiggling to come out of its happy home. There we are. And just trying to get it out without bending that AC line too much. There we are. There is a special tool that I picked up. These are actually fairly cheap. It's basically a bar with a couple holes and a notch in it, and that allows you to grab onto a couple of the bolts. So I can, even just grabbing onto one bolt, there we go. That one's loose. That one's loose. That one's loose. That one's loose. You know, so far I find I don't mind working on these smaller Toyotas for all the work I've done on them. I've certainly worked on stinkier vehicles to work on. Rather not mention anybody by name right now, because I'm sure somebody's going to be a fan of one of them and I'm going to get hate mail. There we are. There's our pulley. Now, really all I need to do is pull the screws and nuts off of that thing. I'm going to take that wiring harness and get it out of the way. It's held on there with a couple tabs. That tab there and that tab there. I'm hoping I can still have enough space to get that pump out, because this stud here came out okay. You can see the eTorque's head on it. The head twisted off the one on the back. So yes, the stud's a little shorter, but it's not coming out like this. I'm hoping I have enough space to get it out. Otherwise I may have to do a little bit of inventive fiddling to get this pump out of this engine. But we should be just about ready to crack it loose and let it spill all over the floor. Well, maybe not spill all over the floor. I do have a drain pan under it. The drain pan is catching most of it. Let's see how long this impeller is. Will you come out? Really? There's a zip tie on this thing? Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Well, I'm thankful I can get it out at least. Yay. Thankfully that stud missing its little head piece is not going to be a problem. I'm going to get a pair of pliers and squish those little ears in. So you just push in on the ends, and then the little tabs squeeze in, and it pops right out. There we are. There's our pump. And we'll take this. Yeah, I'm going to have to scrape the remainder of the O-ring. Yep. I think that's our problem. Now to seal this pump to the block, there's this O-ring, right? Well, sort of formed O-ring. And as you can see, it really doesn't want to stay put in any particular shape. It's got to stay in that little groove. Now trying to get that up against the block and keep it from coming out is going to be a real turd of a time to trying to get that done. So the trick for this is just use a little bit of silicone. Not a lot, just a few little dots. It's not going to damage the O-ring, and it helps to glue the O-ring in place. Just a few key spots. That's all you need. It's not going to hurt anything. It certainly won't hurt the engine, won't hurt the O-ring. And it just helps keep that O-ring situated where it needs to be. Because otherwise it's just going to fall out of place. And then when you try snugging it down, if you try snugging this down with something wedged in between the block and the pump itself, you'll either break an ear off the pump, damage a hole, have a major leak, or all of the above. So with the mating surface here clean and dry, and our O-ring securely in place, just a matter of wiggling it around. Sorry about my arm. And line up that stud. Now one thing I like to do is I actually like to put a little bit of thread sealant on water pump bolts. I'm just putting this one in as a temporary one for the moment because I know I have to get the stud in on the other side. And this is also where that wiring harness is held. So yeah, I'm just going to finish installing the bolts and the nuts, and then we'll put the pulley on. It's now time to put our pulley in. Oh, there we go. Now, feel around until I get the one bolt started in the one hole. And then, we use that funky tool to hold the bolts and tighten the bolts. Which, again, just because of the fact that the camera's in the way, I'm going to do it from the bottom. Again. There's a bit of a trick to doing this without damaging one's knuckles. Because I will admit, it's kind of a sketchy hold sometimes. Here's one. There we go. 4 of them. That guy right there is what you need to put your 19mm socket on. And that whole bracket with the pulley, the hydraulic tensioner, the whole 9 yards, that moves with that. The pivot point is toward the back of the block. Again, I can't get the camera in to give you a really good view, but that's where you have to move to take the tension off the belt tensioner. Now it's time to reinstall the alternator. We'll flip this harness back out of the way. One other thing of note is on this alternator, as like a lot of them, the nut on the one side where the bolt goes, the nut on this side where the bolt goes through to hold it to the block, the nut is actually captured and can slide. As you tighten the bolt, it pulls it inward, and then this surface here on the inside engages the mount point on the block. When I was pulling it out, I had to wiggle it back and forth to get it out. If you take the bolt, the original bolt, put it in this hole till it goes into there, spin it in about 5 or 6 threads, and then lightly tap it with a hammer. You can get that nut to move. Lightly tap it, because if you go too hard you may break the ear off. But by doing that, it makes it a lot easier to install the alternator again. And come on, wiggle you into place. There we are. See, just slid right in. Didn't have to wiggle it back and forth. It just slid right in. Upper bolt. Okay, it started. And get our lower bolt in place. Again, upper bolt is a 14mm hex, lower bolt is a 12. I'm going to tighten those up because my hand's going to be in the way tightening them anyway, so there's no point in you watching my elbow move back and forth. As for wiring, I did already make sure that this connector here, where it goes down to the crank sensor, those two bolts were in place on the water pump. We can now start reassembling this part. Reinstall the connector to the crank sensor. There we are. This little bolt can go back in. 10mm head, it's a M6x1. This little connector can click in here. That holds that wiring harness. Then we have our alternator field and regulator control connector. And this guy here. And this is our high current lead. Goes back onto the high current post of the alternator. Now I'm not going to use the impact to install it, but one thing is we're going to make sure we don't touch anything else that's metal. There we are. So our water pump is in, alternator and everything's back in, electrical connectors are reconnected, harnesses are secured. Really all we need to do is put the belt back on, refill it with coolant, put the tire on, the skid shield, and bleed the air out of it. Now this belt has seen some use. It is still usable. Now what looks like might be the stinkiest grooved pulley to get around is going to be the power steering, just because it's so close to the frame rail. Let's see. So we tilt it forward. Again, you have to go gently and slowly. There we are. Again, because it's hard to get in here with a camera, what I'll do is I'll draw up a little diagram of the belt routing. I can't use somebody else's diagram because of copyright reasons, of course. So I'll draw you up a diagram and we'll add it in. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinstall the bottom skid shields, reinstall the tire. That's all basic stuff. You'd probably be boring for you. And then we're going to refill the coolant and purge the air. Now that we're back on the ground, the skid shields are in place already, the drain is tightened up, and I just snugged up the lug nuts. One thing to remember is Toyota lug nuts are 80 foot-pounds. I actually have another friend who has a Vibe as well, and one of the local tire shops They did a tire rotation on his car one time, and he couldn't figure out why he was suddenly having all his studs pop off on him. He wound up replacing all 20 of them. And part of the problem was this shop, the shop policy was, everything gets torqued to 120. We don't want anything coming loose. Well, some of these aren't designed for that, so make sure you use the correct torque on the lug nuts. Toyotas are 80. And yes, I realize it says Pontiac, but it's still a Toyota vehicle, really, when you stop and look at the mechanicals of it. Next step is to refill the coolant using a 50-50 mix of Dex Cool and water. That is one thing that carried over from GM into these, is using Dex Cool coolant as opposed to the Toyota coolant. And one thing I will say is I'm thankful that the engineers at least thought of one thing. They have a small tube that runs from the upper rad hose all the way around to the filler neck. And that makes it way easier to get the air out. There we go. Way easier to get the air out. I can see the bubbling and the blurping. Otherwise, some vehicles, it's brutal. You end up having to use a vacuum tool or open up a coolant line somewhere else just to try to get the block filled. I mean, we still have to run this and let the engine get up to operating temperature. However, some vehicles, it's just really hard to get the air purged out. Oh, and it appears to have stopped. All right, moment of truth. Nice. No check engine light, no warning lights, no earth-shattering kaboom. And I see some bubbling coming up out of the funnel bottom, so it's just slowly letting the air out. So that's a good sign when you see the bubbling like that. Especially, I mean, it's still cold. I know we don't have a head gasket issue. It's just purging the air out of it. So that's a good sign. That means it's actually doing what it's supposed to. So yeah, I just need to let this thing get up to operating temperature, make sure the coolant level is good, and it's good to go to give back. So after getting all the air purged out of the cooling system, and yeah, no codes, no issues, it's working nicely, and it's way quieter. The bearings in that old one were pretty much done. And I mean, you could see the nasty crusties on the weep hole. It's been weeping for a while. So anyway, my friends will be happy to get the car back, and it was just kind of a nice way to spend the day out in the shop in around between nap times and feeding times or whatever for little man. So it's kind of nice to be able to spend some time in the shop and think about things other than childcare. I hope you all found it interesting, and thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. I'll see you next time.